I'm Zach Powers from Creative Catalyst Productions. In anticipation of the release of David N. Kitler's third DVD workshop, Painting Nature's Textures in Acrylics, I interviewed David about his background, his artistic approach to realist painting, and his adventures tracking exotic animals across the globe. David is a renowned wildlife artist, and he's been painting professionally since he graduated from the Ontario College of Art more than 2 decades ago. David has some difficult chapters in his life story, and you'll hear him refer to those tough times in this interview. When David was 17, his father killed his mother, and David had to support himself by taking a job in a factory. That tragedy altered the course of David's life for years to come, but it eventually steered him toward his career in art. David now exhibits and teaches across North America, and he's a member of the Society of Animal Artists and the Artists for Conservation Foundation. He joined us via Skype from his home in Calgary. David N. Kitler, thanks for joining us at Creative Catalyst.
It's my pleasure.
All right, so you're known as an acrylic wildlife painter, and your Creative Catalyst DVDs focus on animals and natural textures. How did you get started working with wildlife, and has that always been your focus?
Veterinarian was my goal in school in preparation to enter university. And then with the death of my mother at the hands of my father, my life was turned upside down, necessitating the need of a job right away, right out of high school. And instead of going to university, which I had been accepted to be a veterinarian or on my way to being a veterinarian, I ended up in a factory. And art was never in my mind. I'm serious. This is so honest that art was never even a possibility of a job. I didn't even know there was such a thing as an artist. I know it sounds naive, but it sounded like a hobby or something you'd do on the side. But I had always been drawing animals. I still have the first $2 I ever made selling a drawing I did of somebody's dog. And it was like not even a question of animals. And we had raccoons, we had the gerbils, we had cats and dogs like everybody else. But we also had exposure to some more of the not traditional pets, if you know what I mean, with snakes and things like that. And I'd be drawing them all the time. So I don't even know if there became a point where art and animals were ever separate. They had always been in my consciousness from a kid all the way through to, I guess, now.
In the Painting Nature's Textures DVD, you demonstrate methods for working in the studio, from photos and gathered specimens, but you travel to South American jungles and all kinds of other far-off places when you collect your reference material. Even though you paint in the studio often, why is it important to you to spend time in the field?
There's a lot of different feelings you bring back with you, whether they're smells or atmospheric conditions or the type of rock you see or vegetation and all of those things. I always go back to not discouraging somebody from going to the zoo if they can't travel to Africa to see the cheetah or the elephant or the zebra or whatever it might be, but noting that when they're in their zoo, I live in Calgary, so I'll reference it, the Calgary Zoo does not have African grass in it. And you can't import grass or wood or bark or whatever it might be when you bring back specimens. So your experience of the animal in a North American setting, even though it's from a different continent, is going to be wrong because they just can't bring the trees that would survive here or the vegetation or whatever. They can mimic it, but it's never going to be something that you're going to be able to say without a doubt, I saw that bird on that branch or that animal under that rock or whatever it might be. So what I'm conscious of is not trying to just fake in or get a pretty picture. It's trying to get the right picture to the best of my ability. And the best of my ability means going and exploring the habitat that animal lived in. You can walk around the rainforest and never see 2 trees the same. Every tree has a different type of bark. Every type of tree has a different leaf, and vines that grow on one tree that don't grow on another. How do you record that information or make it up? We can't, right? Unless you've been there to experience it. And I even on the side of my thinking realized that the sounds you hear in the jungle can actually inform you when you're painting in your studio. You'll remember those sounds and that'll kind of direct your painting to include something. I don't want to overdo it, but I just think it would be so empty to be copying a photo that you've never experienced all the other sensory sources that come into play around it. Hearing, smell, touch, taste even in some cases. It is an experience. And if you haven't experienced it, what are you trying to share? You're showing me how well you fake things. And that's not really what I'm impressed by. I want to know what you've experienced. Maybe that's what I'm trying to do, show what I've experienced.
Once you are back in the studio, you rely in part on photos. Do you have any photography tips for aspiring wildlife artists?
If you want to become a better photographer, I hear people ask this, what courses do I take? What do I do? Read the manual. Read it. If you don't read the manual and you start having trouble with your camera, don't come back to me, I say. If you didn't read the manual, you're not serious enough about being a photographer. Read the manual. Read the manual. Read it from back to front, front to back. Read the manual. I want to get that through because it's so frustrating to see people with their manuals that have never been opened. It will teach you everything you need to know about your camera. Because now we're in the digital age, it's instant results. So take lots of pictures. Nobody's going to care if they're out of focus or whatever. 2 months later or a year later, when you're in your studio in the middle, like I am now, it's minus 29 degrees outside, snow-covered ground. And if I have to remember what that leaf looked like in Panama, I don't care if everything else is out of focus. If one leaf is in focus in my reference, it was worth the shot. But if I've got to remember that tree in Panama, and I've been in Honduras, Costa Rica, or Africa since, my mind's going to be lost. So take lots of pictures is the next thing. And obviously, as you take the pictures, spend time looking at your screen on the back of the camera to make sure that you've checked that you've got what you want. Zoom in on something, zoom out. That's pretty much what I say all the time is wait for the animal to take off and then just spend some time looking around, making sure that some of those supporting cast members, the leaves and the bushes and the grasses are documented on film. I was in Africa last year and had to stop, climb on top of the truck we were driving, and drove under an acacia tree to get photos of the leaves that would be at the level the giraffe's neck would allow it to reach, so that I'm not assuming that the stuff underneath is the same as the stuff on top. So it is a little bit of work. It's quite a lot of work to get that extra reference, but that's what I would say you have to do. Play around, with different lenses because different artists will see things a different way and change viewing angles. Everybody sees everything head on with a flash head on. I have a flash that, like a phone cord, goes to my camera and connects the flash so that I can hold it 3 to 6 feet away, right? And then I can change the angle of my flash. I don't use a lot of flashes, but I do night photography, night walks. So that I'd recommend if you're doing any flash photography. And then the angle. A lot of my paintings, if you look at them, I guess I elevate the bird or I elevate the animal. I don't want to have the feeling in my paintings that you're looking down on something. I want to lift it up. It's not a form of glorifying it or anything. It's just a different pose. A lot of people are so set on, taking it at eye level or looking down on it that translates into a lot of paintings these days. And I want to be a little different and maybe distinguish myself that way.
You say in Painting Nature's Textures that when people describe your work as photographic, you don't take it as an insult because that's what you're striving for. And we found that really interesting. So what makes you interested in a photorealistic style of painting? And do you sometimes have to defend that practice to other artists? Or also wondering what makes the paintings different from the photograph?
I don't want to look at art that looks like the person, if they lifted their bangs, would have the word Xerox or Canon photocopier, underneath it. I don't want to see that. That's not what art is. That's just technical skill, right? What I'm hoping to see is realistic paintings that portray the actual surroundings, but with an art style to it. I want it to be defined as more of a piece of art as opposed to a photocopy. When I talk about the detail, though, the realism that I'm trying to get, it's in the context of a painting, not in the context of me showing off how well I can make it look like a photo. So sometimes it's an insult to hear, oh, that looks like a photo, because then I think, oh, do they think all I did was copy a photo? Because pretty soon, I think through the use of DVDs like mine, people are going to learn how to do every technique to make it look exactly like a photo. But I don't want it stopping there. It's realistic. I've put abstract backgrounds. I've worked with graphite. I've put graphic lines around it, to make the artwork stand out as artwork, but still have that realistic feel to it. So in defending myself in the past, I was defending my technical skill. Or if somebody said, oh, but that just looks like a photo that you copied, that nowadays would be an insult for me to hear. The ability to do it, though, is not something everybody can do. And I realized that when I went to art college, where we'd be in some boring liberal arts class talking about art, not actually doing it, where I'd sit down and draw the teacher, and the guy next to me would be doing the same. And the two of us would look at our different pieces of art, and he was amazed at how well I could render in detail this particular teacher. While I was amazed at how well that friend of mine could draw in a cartoon-like form. It would have been a lot more work for me to try to learn his style to mimic what he can do versus sticking to what felt natural to me. So I'm not downplaying the fact that it's looser or, impressionistic or whatever. I am a realistic painter by nature. That's how I was born. And he, for the life of him, couldn't do the realistic, nor could I do the cartoon as easily. The skill involved is definitely a skill. But the thinking like an artist has to be involved also, or else you're just a craftsman versus an artist. At one time, I thought the end of the rainbow was being able to render it perfectly. Every grass, every hair, every bit, so it looked like a photo. That's changed. So your question is almost dated in my experience, because now I've gotten to the point where, yeah, I know how to do it. I know I'm teaching others how to do it. So soon we'll all be able to do it. And what's going to differentiate any of us? Well, it's got to be something above that.
What considerations do realistic painters have to take that other artists don't? And what advice would you give to artists who are interested in the realist style?
I think that goes back to the foundation, which I believe is the ability to draw. There are 4 steps, I think, to the painting process. The first is the idea. What is it that you're going to do and how are you going to do it? It's not just taking the photo and copying it. It's how you're going to do it differently. When you have an idea, the next thing is that you have to be able to draw. In a realistic style, you can't fake it by smearing a bunch of paint down on the canvas and saying, oh, that looks like a leg of a lion or giraffe or whatever, with one swipe of the palette knife. When you learn how to draw, you have to be able to look. And I'm talking about seeing differently. It's not just, yeah, I see that it's this wide and this tall, but you have to start noticing the fur direction or feather direction or the light source and the reflected light to create the form. I would say that you have to draw well and spend a lot of time looking at what you're trying to do. To become a realistic painter, you have to know your subject well. The painting, the techniques that come out in the DVD will be all you need to know to have the third step taken care of. And at the end, I say that signing it is an important part of the painting. And I don't mean how to spell your name or which side to put it on in the painting. I mean when to do it. A lot of people don't know when to stop. If you're a realistic painter, there are those who will paint background to 1,000 miles away in detail, and it looks wrong. You don't see that in nature. You focus on certain things and then you focus on another area. The idea in a painting, I believe, is to bring people to where you want them to look. Usually it's the eye of an animal, but it is about moving the person to look where you want them to look. Sure, they'll go away from that center of interest or focus, but they'll be brought back through all the devices that you're going to incorporate into your painting.
The core process you demonstrate in painting nature's textures is layering transparent washes over opaques. So when and how did you start using that method?
When I was working in the factory, I was working from 7:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon in my factory job, and then going to school from 4 till 10 at night. So my weeks were full. There were 5 days of the week that I was doing that. And sometimes I'd work longer in the factory on the weekends. But I really had to jam to get my homework in, meaning I didn't have days to do it. I had weekends to do it if I had any that were open. And I'd be doing lots of hours of painting, just trying to get homework done for my art courses while I'm working full time. So what I do for reference, if there was a project, and it was a editorial illustration where you do a picture so that somebody reading the article, looking at the picture first, would almost have the article or the story unfolded through the pictures. And I had a teacher who came into class and he said, okay, here's the article, here's the story, and I want you guys to do a picture to lead into this story. And it just happened to be office romance, okay? The story was on office romance. And I had an idea of putting people over those cubicles, that just so somebody peeking over could look into the cubicle next to them. And I needed some reference. So I grabbed a few students out of the class and I grabbed my teacher and I took pictures of them just holding a piece of cardboard and said, look over that cardboard so I could paint you later on, using you. And the teacher had a beard. He was red bearded with some gray in it and whatever else. And the speed of having to get the illustration done and the coarseness of his beard and the detail, he was like, their hands and their eyes were the feature of this particular painting. I took some white paint over some maybe previously drawn out beard hairs in red or orange or whatever you'd want to call them that had opaques. And in the course of doing that beard, I accidentally didn't add white to a color and just went over it and noticed how it changed that white and made it sparkle so that some of the orange beard or red beard hairs with the white ones interspersed between them got this wash of color over it. And it was quite an accident, but I liked it. And I, again, recognized it. Could have been a mistake, but this wasn't. It worked. And I went, I think I'm onto something. It almost brings me to tears to think of that painting. I still have it to this day because a month or two after the school had ended and I had graduated, I believe, that teacher, who was the only one I went into his actual studio to see his setup, he was an accomplished illustrator, called me up and with nothing to gain, he passed on a compliment that he said he'd only told one other person in the world about where he thought I would end up as an artist. I don't need to repeat it here, but it was very complimentary and hopefully I've lived up to it. That was the first painting I did. And then the beard had so much similarity to fur that I said, this is going to be used somehow, sometime later. And remember, I'm in the factory, so there wasn't a lot of time to really put it to use until I finally finished and graduated. And then by then I had left the factory and started applying it to my art right away. Because I teach, I still have that. I drag it back and forth to classes because it is like a touchstone moment, more because of the compliment the teacher gave me. Each of us should have a mentor, somebody we look up to and think, wow, I'd like to be there one day. I'd like to be able to say, I've had my artwork on the front of Time and Maclean's magazines or whatever it is. He was at that time somebody I really looked up to because of the illustration angle. And remember, I'm in art college thinking I got to make a living out of my art. So the only venue I thought that would be was commercial art. I never knew this art stuff that I'm doing now is something you could make a living with. I know it sounds naive, but all of that was just so distant away from me that I could ever live a dream that somebody was paying me to do a painting. I get the fun of traveling to get the reference for that painting, and I get the fun of painting that painting. Oh, at that time, everything was geared toward commercial, and it isn't now that way.
How did you make the transition once you got out of the factory into making a living from art?
I was making $40,000 a year in the factory, and I thought, good income, but, I'm not doing any thinking. Basically, I was working landscaping, shoveling snow because they had given me a steady job, a daytime job, so that I could attend college at nighttime. It's one of the things I begged from them. But I remember thinking that if I made half of that as an artist, I would be so thrilled, right? If I could make half of 40 or 20,000, I could live a year on that. I was unmarried and not a lot of expenses to concern myself with, didn't matter how old my car was or whatever. But I thought if I could make half of that 40, to 20, I'd be happy. When I was in art college, people started asking the teachers, do you have any time or would you be interested in doing calendars, book illustrations, things that had nature themes in it, bars of soap labels, the earth-friendly soaps that may have had strawberries or whatever on it. And the teachers would all say, no, I don't have time for that. It's not my thing. Oh, but wait, we have a student in class who tries to do nature and wildlife with every topic we give them, and it was me, right? So if I had to design a book cover, I'd do 10 birds of prey or something, or a book cover for the birds of prey, while others might do a golf thing or something, right? So the teachers started recognizing me as being a wildlife interested artist, and I got all these jobs. And I think it was the first year I made $17,500 as a student, still going to art college, right? And I thought, ooh, it's like a door was opening, where I could share both, do the wildlife art and do the art for the commercial market, sort of specialize, if you want to call it, in that area. And Again, it's naivete that led me to not assume that I'd ever be a wildlife artist, but trying to bridge the gap by making money and painting wildlife, if you know what I mean. And that's where that transition took place, as I started saying, okay, if I have to do commercial art, let me try doing it with nature in it. The same way I had been doing my school projects. And up till that time, they were limited opportunities in school, but I tried to. And again, in the factory, anybody who saw my artwork would say, can you draw my dog, my cat, my kid, or my wife? I'd tend to want to do the animals, but still would draw the people if, the reference was good.
When our Creative Catalyst staff is editing your DVDs, we often correspond with your wife, Lee, and we've seen that many artists have spouses who play roles in their art careers. So what role does Lee play in your career?
She does it all except the painting. I get to paint the pretty pictures, and she gets to do all the boring stuff in the office. There is a lot of pressure on her, and there's enough work to keep it a full-time job, basically. But she has another job that pays. That's where she is right now. She's working, right? So very important. I could obviously learn how to do the web pages, spend more time emailing, handle the requests for DVD sales or print sales, or find new markets to push your artwork into, but less painting would be done. I know there are artists who do it on their own, and I'm amazed at being able to do that. Same with artists who have children. I don't know how they could do it. I am so blessed to have Lee doing it, or I wouldn't be where I am, without a doubt.
How do you think a student can learn best from a DVD?
I think the best way to view a DVD is like buying another tool for your toolbox. Look at the artist's advice, suggestions, materials, anything that they're showing, and say, okay, I'm going to take everything that person's shown me and add it to my toolbox. I'd hate to see somebody become a clone, to mimic the other artist and become, that artist in a different body. I would rather see that person recognize the fact that they have something to offer. They've come into this DVD. I don't know them, so they haven't been influenced by me. They have a whole bunch of influences that they've brought already to this DVD. And then they watch mine and they become a better person, hopefully. Watching my DVD, I hope, adds to people's lives and become somebody even better, because I've only got me. That's all I'm working with here. But they've already got a whole bunch of influences themselves, and now they're adding me to it. So they should be way better off.
Do you sell prints or only originals, and why?
Oh, boy. I know that prints make accessible my artwork to people who can't afford an original. I don't mean to say that people shouldn't buy prints or shouldn't do prints. I don't like prints. When I go to a show 10 years after I've done a painting, and I put that painting back on my wall in a print form, and I'm surrounded by the 15 or 20 prints that might, accompany it, before or after, I feel like I'm in a time warp, that 10 years ago, this level of work is now still representing me. And I hope that when people come to my booth or see me, I've changed in the last decade. I hope that the work they see me doing now isn't the same I was doing 10, 20 years ago. Financially, it's a concern too. If you invest a lot of money in a print and you can't sell them, or you're not doing shows that allow prints to be sold, then you've got a lot of inventory that you're responsible for, that you got to say, well, we need a new furnace, but there's $10,000 sitting in prints there. Like that might be a silly comparison, but it's a reality. As an artist, you invest when you do prints. They cost money, right? Now, as giclées are on the market, it's a little different, but I was talking more litho prints. It is exposure. So when somebody like Ducks Unlimited approaches me and says, we like one of your paintings, can we do a print of it? Well, then I'm thrilled, because I haven't invested a penny in it. My work it's like advertisement going out to parts of the world I don't even know. So I wouldn't close a door on prints. I just hope I'm growing enough that prints become outdated, or I'm not going to grow. I'm not going to change. And the last thing I want to say is I have a gentleman who regularly at a show would come up in his wheelchair and show me the print that he bought that particular year of mine. The prints are in a different building in this show, so I'm not near them to see what sales are going on. And one year after he had bought at least 3, I remember grabbing his arms to get his attention, and I'm saying, I would rather you not buy one more print of mine, but to save your money and buy, even if it's 3 years from now, a small original from somebody in this show. Then I feel you've got something unique if I could put it into words, I'm trying to think about not the investment, because even buying an original is not an investment, but it's more the uniqueness of it. When I see a print of a painting I've done, I know that it's 10% smaller. I reduce it on purpose so the original is the original. But I still feel that you're buying one of many things, and I limit my prints, but it still feels that 250 is a lot of one image to be out there in the world. I would rather see more originals. Instead of people spending that $100, spend a little bit more, but buy something unique.
Since you talked a little bit about business in there, I should ask, how much time do you and Lee spend on marketing and publicity, and how do you spend that time?
You want to get your work out there. You want that exposure. I don't want to sit in my studio and not show my work anywhere. It's a lot of work for me to pack up everything, to go to a show and Charleston, South Carolina, or Fallbrook, California, or whatever, and Alaska, wherever it may be, in Ontario and Canada here. It costs a lot of money to either drive across the country, ship my work, clear customs, pay for hotels, gas, whatever along the way. But it is to get my artwork into a show where hundreds or thousands of people would have been told there's going to be some wildlife art. So I know I'm targeting a market that is prepared to look at wildlife art. And that might be my best form of advertising. I look at even the DVD as a way to get people to see my artwork in a different form. They may not buy my art, but they might be inspired by it, which in a sense is what I'm trying to do with my art, is get them to look at nature and respect it or appreciate it or whatever, right? So marketing, I could think of taking $1,000, for example, if that was my advertising budget. Just hypothetically, it's not. It's a lot more. But if you put that $1,000 in a magazine, it'll show to those people who subscribe to the magazine or pick up that magazine. But I can go to a show and show people the same information I would have had in that article in the magazine, but get it into their hands. And then they're in front of my booth. They're looking at my artwork. It happened the other day. I had a friend over, a doctor friend, who had never seen the original art. He's been to my website, but when he came into the studio and saw the originals and saw that they're like 6 feet wide by 3 feet tall or 5 feet tall or whatever the story was framed, it's a whole different feeling than looking on a website where you don't have the resolution or whatever. So it's nice to get people in front of your art. I just find it better, as my advertising budget goes, to spend it doing shows every so often than to maybe do it in a magazine. We do have printed material, but again, that printed material can be handed out at a show. Any opportunity to be a juror or to be in a magazine article, a newspaper, anything like that, I'll take advantage of it and I'll try to do the best job I can to get out there. I don't want to turn down anything, but I don't want to be so focused on marketing that I'm not doing any art.
Do you ever hit creative dry spells? And if you do, how do you move past them?
Okay, the thing about dry spells, they will happen. You know, you're going to be in a bad mood. Something could have broken in your house that you got to think, oh, I got to take care of that instead of painting. Never stop thinking. When I'm working on a painting, the painting that I'm working on may have nothing to do with a thought that comes up in your head at some time. A TV show, a photograph you left lying around. I do that a lot, actually, leave a lot of photographs that I've taken hanging around for years so that I look at them when I'm in a different mood, and then I start thinking, how could I portray that differently or group some or whatever it might be? Well, when I'm in a dry spell, I go back to those ideas. It happened in Africa. We were traveling and we were there for a couple months, but at the very beginning had a couple traveling with us for a couple weeks. And it seemed almost comical after a while when enough animals turned their butt, like sort of either ran away or turned their head away from us, that the gentleman I was with said, oh, another butt shot, butt shot, butt shot, butt shot, right? Well, as a joke, we started thinking, well, wouldn't it be interesting to do a painting of a bunch of animals going away from you, flying away, taking off, or whatever? It may be a stupid idea, but it's an idea is what I'm saying, right? So turning lemon into lemonade. Well, when you're in a creative dry spell, if you've never taken a note up till that point of these ideas that might have come through, then you'll never have anything to draw from or refer back to. And sometimes that's all you need to go, oh, I remember thinking that. And I was too busy doing the painting at the time, but oh, that would be such a good idea. And you start gathering your reference, right? So I try to put a lot of my photos into, I call it a thumbnail, painting thumbnails, file my digital photos. I'll just tuck them into a scene. If it's a particular group of paintings that had a theme to it, animals flying away from you, for example, or running away or whatever it might be, they will be what I'll fall back onto. Of course, getting sleep instead of stressing about, oh, I'm not painting, I'm not creating. Yeah, get some sleep. The next morning, you're going to wake up and you're going to go, oh, I feel so much better. I'm going to try this, and try something, experiment. That's the time where you should be throwing paint, drawing, big, small, whatever you're not used to doing, so that you're not working to a deadline. You're free, you're open, and you say, heck, I can do whatever I want now because I don't have an idea.
Yeah, that makes me interested. Is habit important to you? Do you have particular hours where you draw or paint?
Yeah, I do have hours that I know I work better in, and that's the hours after everybody's in bed. And I mean everybody outside who would be phoning me. I work well from supper time on, but 10 till 2 in the morning is probably my most productive time. When I get up, there's just too many things in the day, that have to be done, from pets to emails to whatever else. So creative time is definitely later in the evenings for me. But again, I'll have a nap in the daytime. I'm not too proud to say that because I usually get up. If I go to bed at 2, I'm up at 8 in the morning, 8:30 anyways. I don't get a full night's sleep, like 8 hours, if you know what I mean. I'll get it throughout the day if I need it. Because I'm working that late at night, I try to compensate for daylight with my fluorescent lights overhead, halogens, and incandescent. So I've got a lot of different light sources. Most people have to think about when you're painting where the painting's going to be hung. And in a house nowadays, it's either incandescent or halogen lighting. So painting under those lights will keep the painting in that same temperature tone. So that's just a side thing. But for sure, habits, yeah. I'll say I haven't painted today, I get busy doing it, but I might stop the painting and do other things that lead to what that next painting might be. Right now, it's like I'm painting a salad. It's a rainforest in Panama, lots of leaves, lots of green. It gets boring, right? Unless I'm doing a specific leaf. But I'll find something else to do in that painting or that time when I am getting bored that will help my next painting come along. You got to keep working. If you get too lazy and it starts getting comfortable for you, your productivity will fall. But more than productivity, it'll be the ideas. You just scramble to get something out because you haven't been painting in a while. Invest a lot of time into it.
You're a member of the Group of 12, which is a recently formed collective of Canadian contemporary realist artists. Could you tell me a little bit about that group?
Okay, first of all, I was approached a few years ago and I heard nothing of it. I had no previous idea of what was going on. The 3 founders flattered me by asking me to represent Canada to the world as a realistic artist. And I thought, that sounds good. What do I have to do? How much is this going to cost me? That kind of question, right? And when they said nothing and nothing, I said, I'm in. If it's more exposure, that's great. And then I found out through the course of a conference call, actually, that I was worried about the years I had lost in the factory because I'm just a laborer in the factory, never took art, never had any education in that regard, that I felt like I'm 10 years behind where I should be. Because I lost that 10 years, maybe that others had. And when I was in art college, everybody seemed to be 10 years younger than me, and that maybe that's what was going on. But the thing I heard from them was that you do realize our age. And I said, no, I don't know what your ages are. But they said, well, we're up at your age, right? And I thought, really? And he said, yeah, you realize that as a realist, you don't learn that overnight. It takes years to perfect what you're doing. And I thought, they're right. You don't pick up your brush day one and become a highly accomplished realist. And I'm not talking about myself. I'm saying that they were. And I felt flattered to be included, flattered to have this opportunity to basically be in a group that aren't all wildlife artists. They're doing all different media and subjects. It ranges from portraiture to still lifes. We had our first show November and December of 2010, where we had our art under one roof, and I was proud to be part of it. I mean, proud to be included in the group and proud of the group. We'll work better as a group than we do as individuals when it comes to shows, which again is part of that marketing thing. And as a group of 12, we might be able to get some more corporate sponsorship or local sponsorship.
Yeah, and as a professional artist, how important for you is membership in a collective like Group of 12 or in a signature organization or any other group?
Well, I'm going to add another group, Artists for Conservation. Okay, that group I belong to is one that has 500 artists versus the 12 of the Group of 12. And a bigger body seems to command some respect. And whether it's artificial or not, it doesn't matter. It still opens doors. And I was honored to be chosen as the first member to go into the jungles of Panama, for example, studying, any creature of my choice, which happened to be the harpy eagle. And talk about a thrill when somebody can pay you to do something you do anyways. You'd pay to do basically and not ask much in return, right? So it was quite an opportunity that a group opened the door to. So you can be aloof and call yourself self-taught and, oh, I'm independent. I don't do, yeah, you can do that. You can survive that way also. But I think there's so much more to glean from others that are part of your brotherhood or sisterhood or clan or whatever you want to call it is going to afford you. We have the respect of each other. It takes some skill to become a member in these groups. And once you've bypassed that, you almost become family. As these groups grow and people find out about you, they also share similar interests. And some of them will want to do a trip somewhere else and say, would you want to come along? And there's an opportunity, to go to Africa or something. I have a friend who's really actively involved in bird banding. So he knows a lot of North American birds and catches them, but others will go to Africa and he'll have friends in Africa who do the same thing he does in North America. Well, we may be going to Africa to band birds in Africa because of the connection, that bond between fellow artists.
You mentioned you went to art college. How important is art school or other formal training, and how far can an artist go without it?
You learn a little bit in art college fast, but it's the business side of things. If you're going to a college where they're showing you everything, then that's different. Then you found a unique art college, because the one I went to, I didn't learn a lot of technical stuff until I begged my teachers if I could go to their studio, see how they're set up, or actually bring in a piece in progress or whatever it might have been. In art college, I learned how to teach because I watched teachers who did a good job and teachers who didn't do a good job. And I said, oh, if I ever taught, I'd like to teach that way. So hopefully that helped me as an artist in terms of reaching other artists. The difficulty with art college is I got a piece of paper, but nobody in the world has ever seen that piece of paper that said I graduated from art college with honors. Who cares? They want to see the portfolio. And it's what you bring out of the art college with you. As I explained about DVDs, you're learning about me in this example of my DVD, how I do things. Well, you add that to your toolbox, so will you in art college add the knowledge that your teachers impart to you and other students if you pay attention. I would say there's value in it. I don't think your life will end if you don't go to art college. I think you learn a lot more if you took an art course with other artists. DVDs also are the next way to go. Even better sometimes because you can stop forward. You don't bore your teacher by asking the same question 20 times. You can just rewind it. But I do remember my graduation from art college, the president standing up and saying, I want you kids to realize that as you go forward now, you cannot create in a vacuum. Meaning that if you sat in your studio and painted day and night, nothing new is being imparted to you. Nothing is being brought in. He says, whatever you do, find a group of other artists and get together. Start painting, focus, learn from their mistakes, challenge each other, do whatever you can. He says, you won't do that if you're sitting alone in your studio. So I thought, great. So I teach now, and my students probably don't recognize how much they teach me because they force me to look up something, ask me a question I don't know the answer to, or show me something that they tried that I'd never thought of. So that's what I'm saying. DVDs will do, classes will do, and art college will do at different levels. One obviously has more cost and commitment. You have to do it over a certain period of time. Others you can do at your own speed and leisure.
On one of your reference gathering trips, you and Lee developed a special relationship with some indigenous people in Panama. Could you tell me a little bit about your involvement with the village of Llano Benito?
When we went to Panama, funded by the Artists for Conservation, basically an email came to me saying, you could go anywhere in the world and select any creature to portray, and we'll pay you some money to do it. Where would you want to go? And Lee and I looked at each other and said, well, I know what we want to do. It would be the harpy eagle, the most powerful bird of prey in the world. And I thought, okay, Brazil has them, but it's harder to find them in the Amazon. Panama, it's their national bird. So what I did was take some of that money and hire a guide before we even went down to scope out some areas in Panama where they think I'd have the best chance of finding this bird. And it just so happened that 3 nesting sites were on the land of this particular tribe of people. I didn't know much more about it, except that the day that I arrived, it was a December 3rd, which was my birthday, the driver and the guide turned around and said, we have some good news for you. We think there's a chick in this nest. And I said, well, then let's go, without a doubt, let's head down there as quick as possible. And there was a chick on the nest, and that meant the adults would be around, and it was great. What I didn't do was I have a lot of cultural knowledge of the indigenous people, but they turned out to be very secluded and in the dense part of the Darien jungle in Panama, next to the Colombia border. When we showed up, it was dark, but the next day when we arrived, it was already approaching dark. We were wearing headlamps. The next morning, I remember getting out of my hut that they had provided for us, turning around and a kid screaming. I didn't know what was going on until I realized that that kid had never seen a white person before. Neither had a lot of the children in the tribe. So we were so far out of that tourist mode that I just realized that these people have nothing. They don't have food on a regular basis. They don't have electricity. They had pure water, running water. When we had stayed there for a while, we used their village because it was close to the nest, commuted back and forth. Rather than staying under the nest all the time, we stayed in a hut provided for them, and that allowed us to pay them and bring some money into their economy, paid them for their accommodations, paid them for guiding us to the nest, paid them for cooking for us. And it was minimal cost, but, really it was well worth it. When the time was ending, though, the guide who had been away for a couple days came back into the village by horseback. We had been on our own, and jumped off of his horse, and he said, guess what the kids are doing in the next village in their spare time? And I went, I don't know. What? He said, they're killing birds with slingshots. And I went, no way, here we're artists for conservation. And that's going on in my head. I'm thinking, we got to do something for these people, right? Before the guide came back, the teacher and I, for some reason, were able to relate to each other. We couldn't speak the same language. My wife was doing a lot of the translation because the guide was in a different village. I asked him innocently, I said, listen, my wife and I, we don't have a lot of money, but is there something we can do that would help you or the tribe or whatever? And he said, education, he says, is the children are our most important asset. If we could teach them, any school supplies would be so appreciated. And I thought, oh, school supplies are easy. And then he said something that kind of confused me. He said, baseball equipment. And I went, what? We're in the jungle. It's cleared out. Mind you, there's a big open area. Llano Bonito means beautiful plain, meaning field. And he said, if you could give us anything like baseball equipment, I could teach these children teamwork. It's Panama's national sport, and we would have some things to do here. And I thought, oh, I'll ask. When I get back, I'll look around. I got a glove or something. But that's when the guide came into the conversation. He came off of his horse and interrupted the conversation as I was learning about baseball, that the importance of giving the kids something to do other than kill birds with slingshots, it all happened at the same time, if you know what I mean. Like, I want to distract these people, let them have some baseball fun rather than killing birds, right? So I got back to Canada and I had to do a phone interview on a radio station across Canada the day after I returned. And a guy was sitting in his car, he said, and 5 minutes after the conversation ended on the radio, he phoned me and says, I just Googled your name on my whatever and called you up because I have a bunch of baseball equipment. Would you want it? And I said, what? Yeah, I'll take it. Because I had just told them the same story on the radio. And the next day I get more calls. Students start bringing in school supplies and baseball. Hundreds of pounds of stuff started being collected. And there was such a grueling hike in and out of this jungle for Lee and I that we at the end turned to each other and said, I guess we're too old for this, because it was up to our knees in mud and ticks, and it was horrible, right? But it was interesting to see my wife sitting at the computer shortly after that looking for the schedules for flights back to Panama, to know that we were going to go back and see that tribe again. So we've since been back. This would be my fourth time if we go. We've brought back school supplies, medical supplies, sports equipment, put in toilets last year. So it's been nice to go back and turn an exploration into their local fauna and flora and be able to add to that, not just take away. And that's the way I think art should be, where you can add something or contribute something that maybe wouldn't have happened if you had not been interested in doing something.
David, thanks for joining us at Creative Catalyst.
It has been my pleasure, and I hope you can use some of the words.
Absolutely, thanks. David N. Kitler's third DVD workshop, Painting Nature's Textures in Acrylics, is available now from Creative Catalyst Productions. Visit our website to watch free clips from the DVD and learn about David's other workshops. You'll find all that and more at ccpvideos.com.